Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Superman and Lois, Season 3, Episode 7. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So I think this episode presents a very interesting element of, obviously we've seen how Lois and Clark have kind of dealt with the whole cancer situation, but the fact is, like, the conversations they've kind of had, how Lois has had to kind of sort of change the way Clark's kind of view things. Like, we have to kind of have this open dialogue. Like, you can't just be fully optimistic like you are. It's kind of a little dismissive of kind of what she's going through, right? And they have kept a lot from Jonathan and Jordan, and that is because it is that thing of, oh, we're trying to protect you. We don't want you guys to worry about something that might not end up being, like, you know, we can't immediately go like to the worst case scenario, but it is a situation of, it's still like they should be just as much involved in this conversation about what's happening, what's going on, because they're being kept out of the loop. And they, like, Jonathan in particular, can tell something's off. You're hiding something from us. And so Jonathan and Jordan ended up going to the fortress to ask Clark's mom about Kryptonian technology. And I love the way they handled it. I mean, first and foremost, it's not that the Kryptonian technology couldn't help Lois's circumstances. It could, but it's too much of a risk. Like, the fact is she could die. But for Jonathan, it's like, who cares? Like, she could die without it. You know, this is something, and obviously he's lashing out because he's scared, he's angry because they're not telling them it. You're keeping this from them, and it's like, right, like, it's a trying time for everybody. Like, no one knows how to, I mean, they're feeling everything all at once, and they don't know how to, like, fully process it, because it's a scary situation where it's like, you know, their mom could die. That is a very real possibility, and it becomes more and more of a possibility with every passing day that she may get better, but there's also just as much of a good chance that she won't, and in fact she'll get worse. So it's a lot. And I also love the explanation of why they won't use it too, is because it's for the greater good. Because if they use if Kryptonian technology is able to cure Lois, that's great, but it'd be selfish of us to keep that from anyone else in the world. And then what happens if that Kryptonian technology gets out in the world? That could be horrendous, you know? I mean, like, there would be people who take that Kryptonian technology and do terrible things with it, and it's like, it's for the greater good that we don't put that out there in the world. So, because it could just have this massive domino effect that we don't know what the full extent of what that could be, the aftermath of that could be. So it's just kind of a thing of, they just kind of have to sadly deal like, you sadly have to tackle it like any other human family would. But I did think it was this powerful moment, and this is an important conversation I forgot to talk about last episode, where Lois talked about what she's going through. It's like, yeah, I'm going through a very human thing. You won't really know what that's, because as a Kryptonian, Clark never really gets sick, you know? And, you know, it's also like, right, you age slower than a normal human being. That's something that we've learned since, like, season 2 of Supergirl. About, like, that's how Kryptonians age slower than humans. And the fact is that you live longer, you'll always be stronger. Like, the fact is, it's not something Clark can 100% relate with. And for Jonathan, it's like, you're a Kryptonian, you've been a Kryptonian your entire life. You kind of forget, you don't know what it's like to actually be human. You've been around humans, yes, but you've never been one, you know? I mean, the closest he got was last season when he lost his powers and was kind of in such a weakened state after Allie, like, zapped him of of everything. So it's like, right, your mom died, your dad died. Like, it is just that, it's just a stark reminder for Jonathan of how much, like, of his mortality, of everyone's mortality. It's a stark reminder of that. And, you know, it never even crossed my mind to think about how, I'm sure Clark probably tries not to think about it, you know, but it never crossed my mind to think, like, well, yeah, he's lost both of his parents to, like, not like, oh, they grew old and died. It's like, no, like, they each had their own medical conditions that ultimately ended up killing them. And then it's like, it never crossed my mind that Clark would probably have that in the back of his mind while with Lois's condition. That I never would have correlated that if Jonathan had never brought it up. So it's a complicated thing, and I think it also hits Jordan too when Jonathan brings that up, because it's like, right, he's in that same situation too. Yeah, he got sick too, but that was like a extenuating circumstance of him getting sick too. So it's just a thing of, but because he is half Kryptonian, we don't fully know what that means for him. But it probably be a highly unlikely he'd ever get like a human disease, you know, or sickness like cancer or anything like that. So it's just that separation in that moment of just kind of like that. Once again, that stark reminder, not only for Jonathan about how human he is also a reminder to the two of them of how human he is, you know. So, but I thought it was powerful too when Clark referenced, when he was talking, he's like, right, don't forget that your brother is half human and that you're half Kryptonian as well. Like, because we don't know in what capacity that means for Jonathan either. Like, he may never develop powers, but maybe there is still something of that Kryptonian in him that will make it so that he still has some of the benefits of a Kryptonian, even if he doesn't ever fully develop powers. I'm so curious what's going to happen when he finds out about the Bruno Mannheim of it all. That Bruno is developing everything he can to save his wife. You know, we'll get to that next. But I'm curious how Jonathan's going to react when he finds out that this is a viable option. It's something that's out there that's not Kryptonian technology related. I mean, hell, for all we know, the moment Jonathan finds out about this, he might actually steal some Kryptonian technology to help Bruno, because it's like, right, we'll help anyone else that's sick, but more so than anything, I'm helping my mom. So for him, it's like, it might be worth the risk. It's like, this way we can help move things along. I'll put you in the right direction to help you cure cancer. That way, like, it doesn't spread anywhere else. But even then, it's like, I don't know. I'm so curious to see if that ends up being the direction. You feel like it is going to be potentially the direction that goes. I don't know if he'd go to the extent of stealing Kryptonian technology to help Bruno if it meant helping his mom, but, you know, it is that conversation of how far are you willing to go to protect the people you love. And it's like, and we see that, you know, and that's the difference between Clark and Bruno. And that's not like to slander Clark, and it's not to slander Bruno necessarily. I mean, it's just all about perspective. Like, the fact is, Clark isn't willing to do everything because there is still the greater good he has to look out for, you know, because also he recognizes, like, but if I do this, it'd be extremely selfish. And once again, the domino effect of how putting that type of technology out there in the world could be used and abused. But Bruno would do anything, you know. And that's a very interesting, once again, parallel between the two of them. One who's willing to kind of go to a certain extent, whereas one that's like, there are no limits to how far I'll go. So it's the same thing. It's just how far they're willing to go. And I don't know. I think that's going to be such an interesting thing that I think that's going to be a big, like, dividing factor, obviously, between Clark and Bruno about their approaches to their wives' circumstances, which, you know, transitioning over to that conversation about learning about Bruno and Pia, which I never realized, because I'd never heard her name until last episode, and I was like, oh, of course, her name's Pia, as in onomatopoeia. Like, I never pieced that together. It's not the same, but it's still like, oh, it's interesting. Like, I wonder, did they do that just for that sake of, and that's so interesting. That I didn't realize, because I looked up her name, because I was like, I kept hearing her name and I couldn't make out what they were saying. And I was like, oh, Pia. Because our last episode I was wondering if they were saying Mia, but it's like, no, her name's Pia, like onomatopoeia. So, which Clark and Lois still don't know that to the person in the mask, onomatopoeia. They don't know that that's her. She's also the one who killed this world's John Henry Irons. She's also the one that killed the mayor. No, that was what's that? What was it? Henry Miller? Was that him? That I can't remember. It was her who killed the mayor of the former mayor, right? I can't remember now off the top of my head. Either way, we learned, like, obviously back, like, that for first and foremost, that Pia and Bruno have known each other since childhood. They've been friends since then, and obviously they worked for a gangster named Moxie, but Bruno's always had the vision of what the South Side, the suicide slums of Metropolis could be, and he presented it to his boss, which also is like, we shouldn't be sneaking behind his back because that's a recipe for disaster. But it's like, yeah, he presented his opinion to his boss, like, hey, I see the potential of what this place could be. So how about we buy out Lex Luthor? He can have the rest of Metropolis. We have this spot for ourselves. We make the Suicide Slums ours, and we take this and kind of forge it into the gem that it could be. You know, he sees the potential in this, and he's trying to get his boss to see that. Ultimately, his boss didn't appreciate that. He was like, give me time to see what's what, but Bruno made moves of his own behind his back, so his boss had Pia literally murder everyone. But Bruno's like, yeah, choose this life with me, always and forever and always, you know? Which is because that's the same model as like the Michelson family from the Vampire Diaries / the originals and / legacies of like, forever and always. It's that beautiful mentality. You know, if you're familiar with that franchise, then you know like the weight of those words in that franchise as well. But either way, but Pia ended up choosing Bruno and ended up killing their boss. Like, because Pia's already, like she said, she did some stuff that she felt like couldn't be forgiven. But for him, it's like, yeah, regardless of that, I think it's like we've all kind of done ugly things because of the circumstances we're in, the place we were born. So, and obviously, Lois, when she was getting her treatment, she's talking to Pia, and it ends up kind of getting a little hostile because Lois is asking questions, and you can tell it was bothering Pia because she did everything she could to kind of defend Bruno last episode, but she can't, like, and obviously it's like, oh, she's looking at pictures of Jonathan and Jordan, and I was like, oh, let me show you pictures of your family. It's like, I don't have my phone with me, and it's like, well, of course you probably don't, especially when it comes to Lois and Lois's opinion of Bruno. But she was kind of upset, and obviously Lois was kind of felt bad. It's like, right, how can I really trust my journalistic instincts because nothing feels right with everything I'm going through? So she ultimately ends up apologizing to Pia, and I thought it was a beautiful moment where she's like, I don't really have many friends, and so I want us to be friends. Like, I'm not just like cancer friends, I want us to be friends. But it's like, yeah, but we grew up in different places, and yeah, we have cancer, but that doesn't necessarily create the recipe for like lifelong friendship type of situation. But it's like, you know, you've always been there for me in this regard. You've been here for me. You've supported me. I have a hard time going through this chemo situation if I didn't also have your support too. But for Pia, when she heard like the way Lois was going on, and just she felt guilty, and it's like, right, I'm gonna tell you the truth. At the same time, I thought it was a beautiful parallel that Clark is interviewing Bruno, trying to get his side of things, and because they cut to the heart of it when Clark is like, yeah, it's just interesting that every venture you ever have like put money towards has always been profitable for you, except for the hospital and the medical research. Is like, that's the one thing that you've put money towards that you've never seen a cent of. And he's like, yeah, why? Because also it's that thing of like, do you really think I'm that garbage of a human being that I would profit from the sick? And it's like, sad thing is there are people who would, but you know, that's how you get investments and stuff like that in the first place, because people need to be able to see a return. That's why people choose like, whether or not they'll put their money behind something, which that obviously can be a whole nasty business in itself when you associate with the whole money behind like people who back like a hospital and stuff like that, like how that could easily, you know, sway things more their direction. They could be like, oh, well, I'm the one funding this hospital or whatever, so I get a little say in how it's run and how certain things go. That's a whole conversation in itself. But in Bruno's case, like, Clark is just like, it just doesn't make any sense. Like, once again, it's just them kind of demonizing him for who he is, thinking the worst of him. But for, you know, Bruno, it's like, how can you say that you're going to willing to do whatever it takes for your wife? It's like, I'm trying to save your wife's life. And in that moment, Clark's like, I don't think you are. He's like, I know what this is about. This is personal for you. Someone you care about has cancer. And in that moment, Pia is talking to Lois. Both stories collide in that moment. Clark comes back with Bruno, and Bruno and Pia you know, and for Lois, it's like, I can't believe I never saw it, you know? And it's like, why after all these years keep this such a secret? And it's like, for Bruno, it's like, everyone has always assumed the worst in me, and I just didn't want people to do the same thing to Pia. Which, obviously, Pia also appreciated this situation, too, because she was like, she liked spending time with Lois and getting to know her. It's like, I think for Pia, it was an opportunity to actually have it worked both ways. It wasn't just like, oh, like, Lois doesn't have many friends. I don't think Pia has many friends either, so they were able to kind of connect in that regard. So I think she just felt guilty a lot, kind of like lying to her face, but it's also like, right, I wanted you to see Bruno for who I see him as, that he's not the man. He's always been the person that's kind of had a vision, and he has done a lot to rebuild this city. And because this was Pia's final treatment, so fingers crossed, kind of hoping everything works out. And it puts Clark and Lois in a very complicated spot, because like, it's like, right, they've always had their vision of who Bruno was, but now it's like, now all we see is like a doting husband willing to do whatever it takes for his wife. It's like, doesn't make it okay. You are still experimenting on people. We don't fully know if they signed up for the experiment, and there is so much like complications, like there is so much destruction in the aftermath of all this. But that was also the point that Bruno was making to Clark, is like, yeah, some sacrifices have to be made for the greater good of, you know, and that's that justification situation. But it's also like, is it a justification, or is it just kind of the reality of it all, of like, yeah, like some sacrifices have to be made for medical advancements, but it's like, Clark's not about sacrificing lives no matter what the circumstances are. It goes back to that. Obviously, we're switching over to the pond of Marvel, across the pond over at Marvel. But the whole conversation with Captain America, we don't trade lives, we don't sacrifice lives. You know, not even one. And that's the thing, because for Clark, it's like every life is important. No life is more important than another. So sacrificing some but it's like, yeah, but it's a few for the majority. But it's also, yeah, but sacrificing one life for another is never okay in his book. And you know, that's that hero mentality. And so I don't know. I mean, not even just the hero mentality. It's just a lot of people's mentality. It's just once again, it's about perspective and your circumstances. And once again, having grown up in the suicide slums where it's probably been kill or be killed type of mentality, then I think that's kind of been fostered in Bruno. So it's like to protect what's yours, in his mind, I'm willing to go so far for the greater good. For Clark, I'm willing to not go so far for the greater good. And it's just measured circumstances and measured actions. It's such an interesting parallel between both of them. So, other than that, in this episode, we're picking up with the complicated Chrissy and Kyle situation, which Lana's a lot more okay with it, because she doesn't blame Chrissy, she kind of blames Kyle, but because Chrissy's trying to make a point of, hey, nothing happened while you and Kyle were together. Like, I mean, it's understandable why Chrissy would have to say that. It's like, Kyle did cheat on you behind your back, but at the same time, I want you to know anything that happened to me and him is after you guys were divorced. It's like, well, to be fair, the paperwork hadn't been finalized, but also they were separated at the time for a while, so, you know, let's not get into that, you know. But Sarah was kind of very snippy towards Chrissy, and so, which even Lana's like, do not kind of put this on her. And I love that Sarah was like, she's like 10 years younger than Dad. It's gross, or it's disgusting, or whatever. Which I'm like, what? Your dad's like what, 40 something? I'm assuming the actress who plays Chrissy is like in her early 30s. So I did look it up. They are basically 11, I think about 10 to 11 years apart in real life. So it is kind of what I thought. It's also the thing of, I guess, in Sarah's mind, her dad's like way older. In her mind, it's like, oh, he's so ancient. And maybe in her mind, Chrissy's a lot closer to her age. I mean, she's probably like a little over half of Chrissy's age. So it probably still makes her, I mean, she's going to say all that because it's like, it's the weird thing of like, yeah, my dad's dating again. I mean, it was a reality that was going to happen eventually. So she's going to feel a certain way about it, considering like how different, you know, obviously her and Sophie had to deal with the fact is that how different the family dynamic has been and everything, right? So there's that element to it. And then later on, she was very, very mean to Chrissy when she was like, oh yeah, like you're my dad's hookup. That's what it looked like this morning or whatever. The moment they called out the order, you could tell everyone was kind of awkward because they knew exactly who that was for. They know exactly what Kyle likes. So they're like, ugh, you're like, but she had no right to talk about Chrissy that way. It's like, first and foremost, you're not going to like talk to me however you want to. I know what you're going through. I guess maybe Chrissy talked about that before. I'm assuming she's coming from the perspective of like, right, I know what it's like to have divorced parents and them kind of moving on type of situation. So, but even like after like Chrissy called her out, Sarah was like, all right, I'm sorry. So let's go see this movie. It's fun. And actually they had a great time. Even found out where it's like, no, we're not going to buy candy at the movie theater. What we're going to do is we're going to sneak. It's like, that's a classic thing. And it's like, oh, not those gummies. It's just, those aren't for, it's like, they're not for sharing. And it's like, oh my God, my dad's dating a stoner. Chrissy's like, please don't tell your dad. I was like, I would have never took you as a stoner type. That's amazing. I love that. That's so cute. And she's just like, yeah, I go to Coachella like every year or whatever. And it's like, she's like, wait, what bands did you go? What bands did you go see? It's like, and actually had a really fun time. And I think that's such a beautiful parallel with like Lois helping out John Henry, because he's trying to be the cool dad when it comes to Natalie and her and Mateo dating. Because it's like, oh, I'm trying to be the cool dad. I'm going to be the cool dad. It's all going to be good. But that kind of all got thrown out the window the moment he like sat down and talked to Mateo and met him and everything. And he saw how Natalie felt. It's like, right, this is Natalie's first boyfriend. So this is his first time ever being in that, overprotective father mode. And it's just like, yeah, ever since she came here to Smallville, especially on this world, it's like, I wanted her to have a normal life, which includes this, which, that was something that Lana was trying to get across. But it's just, it's not the easiest thing, like that drop, like his guard, which obviously, with our revelation later on of who Mateo really is. I mean, Mateo was nothing but a gentleman, obviously, but it still just rubbed John the wrong way. I think it's even more so when it's like when you try to always say the right thing and you always say the right thing, it's going to rub someone even worse. But obviously it didn't scare Mateo off because he was head over heels for Natalie, so... which I think it's kind of a beautiful parallel when you actually look at his parents' circumstances. There was kind of like a true love thing growing between them. That even when later on he tells his mom and dad, like, yeah, I think she's the one. They're like, oh, she's the one, huh? I'm like, you're so young saying that, but maybe it's also because they've known each other. Pia and obviously, once again, jumping ahead, obviously we find out at the end that Mateo is Bruno and Pia's son. Someone had actually suggested and predicted that Mateo was going to end up being Bruno's son. So it turns out that's exactly more. I felt something was going to be off about that kid. He was getting too much screen time. I'm like, feel like you're setting something up, and that's going to be that complicated next generation thing when your family's got beef. But I mean, John Henry's going to have all the reason to have all the beef and smoke with Bruno, but we'll get to that in a second. I'm going on this huge diatribe. I got to get back to the point I was making. Either way, talking to Lana helped John kind of ease up off the brakes, and it's like, right, as long as you treat Nat right, obviously she's falling for you, and you're a good kid. I can tell you're a good kid, so I'm willing to kind of not be as aggro dad about this, which obviously Lana's kind of going, like, she's giving all this advice, but she has her own complicated feelings the moment she sees Sarah and Chrissy having fun together, and even she has to be like, yeah, I have a tendency to not admit how I'm really feeling about things. So Sarah's like, oh, so it's all kind of BS, and it's like, yeah, like, I'm not fully okay with your dad dating, but for her it's a symptom of something larger, where she just feels like ever since the divorce she just feels like everyone's moving forward, and I think she kind of feels like she's a little stuck. And Sarah brought up the advice of maybe it's not about moving forward, it's about being present. So like, what do you want to do? And you're like, right now, if you could do anything. And for her, it's like, I'm gonna set off some fireworks that your dad left here, and they do that and have a lot of fun together. So, which I obviously she's gonna be moving in the like her own direction soon enough, because like Lana and John Henry Irons, like, they've kind of, I don't know. I was kind of eyeing that last season, but I thought, oh, maybe I was reading too much into it. It's like, no, this season I'm like, yeah, they're definitely leaning that direction. So, I mean, because that's also going to be a complicated thing too for Nat, because it's like, well, because that was like, she was kind of having an issue where it's like, she felt like Lana and him were hitting it off too much, and it's like, oh, have you forgotten about Mom? It's like, that is going to be a conversation that comes up eventually. I mean, he hasn't dated since Lois died. I mean, there's been so much going on that you really haven't really had much of an opportunity to have a dating life. You haven't had an opportunity to really live a life. So that's definitely going to be interesting. But getting back to the point I was making with the whole Mateo situation of, that's going to be interesting because Mateo wants John Henry to meet his parents. Which, obviously, it's not like well, we understand, like, the side of, oh, Bruno's done some good, like, oh, sentimental things of, oh, he's done stuff for his, he's doing all this for his wife, but it still doesn't take away from the fact is, he still has done some terrible things. They both have hurt and killed people, and let's not forget, John Henry's not going to be so forgiving, considering, like, oh, wasn't that long ago you were kidnapping my sister? You also killed this Earth's version of me, and you're gonna come after me again too. So, and you went through my sister to do it too. So it's like, yeah, we're not. I'm sure Clark and Lois are probably going to talk to John Henry about that before he ends up meeting Bruno, but it's not going to smooth things over in that department. And once again, he has altruistic reasons why he's doing what he's doing. Doesn't take away from some of the bad he's done. You know, some pretty brutal bad stuff that he's done when it comes to having people killed. And once again, even Pia being the one who's killed those people. So, and it's definitely going to be an interesting development. It's going to be really interesting to see where all that goes as well we go forward into the next episode. Based on the title of the next episode, which I was just looking up, is called Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. All that's going to come, they set it up this episode, so it's all going to come to a head next episode, and that's going to be really, really interesting. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.